Good evening, everybody. My name is Patrick Plein. I'm the Deputy Director of the Nolan Center for... Let's try that again. Good evening, everybody. Who was a leader of criminal justice reform, or trying to get criminal justice reform done through a conservative lens here in Minnesota. And that's something that's really important, is really approaching it correctly. Criminal justice reform is a word that started to be thrown out a lot more. President Trump had the First Step Act at the end of 2018 get signed, which was the first really major piece of criminal justice reform legislation to get passed in Washington, D.C. in a long, long time, especially justice reform going in the right direction. And you know, when the American Conservative Union starts talking about criminal justice reform, we sometimes get some skeptical faces about why are we working on this issue that's been co-opted by the left to mean letting folks out of prison and not holding anybody accountable. But it's really not what it is. That's the furthest thing from what it is. And it's unfortunate that some folks have thought that's the way to go. And we're going to get some great perspective on kind of how to find the right balance between how do we hold people accountable versus making sure that folks who go through the system are going to have a way to come out, are going to be able to reintegrate with their family, reintegrate with society, and not go back to prison. Because anytime somebody goes back to prison, that's them going to commit another crime once they get out. They're going to have to go through the court system. They're going to have to be broken up with their families. And that's not something that we want to see happen in our communities or any communities around the state. So with that, and with kind of the public safety focus of what real criminal justice reform is, in balancing the public safety with holding people accountable and making sure we're spending our government tax dollars wisely, I want to pose this to you.
On the Public Safety Committee, my background was as a fingerprint examiner in the crime lab at the Anoka County Crime Lab. And my family, my dad was the police chief, both my brothers are in law enforcement. A few years back, we added it up. We had 27 Zerwases, or police officers, in the state of Minnesota. And so I could not approach criminal justice reform from a left bend of let everyone out. I couldn't go to Christmas. My family wouldn't let me go to Thanksgiving if I approached this from the wrong viewpoint. And so we looked in Minnesota at what areas can we look at very similar to the First Step Act, at first-time offenders, at small, minute, single-time drug possession offenses, while increasing criminal penalties on the people that are out on the streets peddling drugs and really pushing the problem forward. And by doing that, you're able to lower costs for incarceration, bring people out, and have money left over for training for folks that are going to be reintegrated. Understand that in the current setting for Minnesota, 99% of offenders that are in custody of the Department of Corrections will be released. And so we focused our savings on preparing those individuals to be employed and housed when they are released.
And that's a major piece, is, you know, you see and you hear a lot about kind of the revolving door of the criminal justice system. Once somebody gets in, it's hard for them to fully escape it, for them to get a job and put it fully in the rearview mirror. And that goes down to a lot of, you have these situations in some states where, you know, you pick up some kid on the corner and he's 18, he's 19, doesn't have a ton of education, he's in the system. He's in for 5, he's in for 6 years, he comes out, the world is different. But they say, go get a job. With what skills? He still has the same skills that he had, you know, 6, 8 years ago. In fact, he's lost a lot of his prime years. How can we then, as folks, where you're running a government program, you're in charge of the folks they're reporting to you, how do you look at them and tell them, look, this system where you have people coming in, and the second they get out, they're just going right back in, what are you doing for the 4 years there, and what can you do better? How do you approach that to really get the Department of Corrections to do their job?
I think that's a really important part of it, is we've seen time and time again where large unions come in and they want what's best for dues-paying members, not what's best for actually rehabilitating people in custody. And so we need to make sure that of the money that's being spent, it isn't to dues-paying large unions. The money that's being spent is being spent on true rehabilitation, because these people are coming back out. But I think it's a lot wider than that. We've seen over really across the country around prosecuting motivated decision not to prosecute. And we don't have to look very far in Minnesota after 100 days of riots and unrest. That whether it's in Washington State, where elected attorneys are turning their blind eye to things, or whether it's Mike Freeman in Hennepin County that won't charge a protester, but will today charge an innocent driver of a semi.
And you know, that is a great piece because at the end of the day, the prosecutor is probably the single actor in government that has an enormous amount of power over every single person in this room. I'm sure everybody's heard that a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich. We are all a little more complex than a ham sandwich, or most of us, aka we could get indicted on our way home. The average person commits on average 3 to 4 felonies per day, according to multiple different criminologists and folks who study criminal law. There's really not a known number of laws and regulations that can land you in prison in the United States. It's somewhere north of about 300,000 individual laws and regulations that can land you behind bars, but the lawyers that were in charge of that project stopped counting after that number because I don't think they could keep up with as fast as they were being added. And so kind of my final question with that is in how the criminal code has exploded and how, you know, we've kind of used prison or jail as the default for everything that we don't like what you're doing. How can we kind of figure out, and you know, as a family with law enforcement background, this is, you know, extremely interesting from your perspective. How can we get our law enforcement, our folks who have a really important job to do, to be focused on the people that we need to be focused on, and make sure that we have the resources for them to focus on those people where they can then, you know, the folks that are not doing the major things, get them on the right path. Don't let them just go unscathed, but get them on the right path, but don't spend $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 a year putting them in prison over the course of a handful of years. How can we find that balance there?
Yeah, and I think it's an important balance. I think what's really important is to focus on, we're putting police officers out on the streets every day in an unbelievably hostile environment in this day and time, and everything we do needs to be supportive and respectful to our police officers. If we think that people that are breaking the laws should spend less time in prison or jail, then policymakers need to change those laws and change sentencing guidelines. But we can't start blaming cops that were hired to enforce the law from enforcing that law. We need to respect them. We need to support them. What a challenging time in America to put on a badge and put on a gun. We should all say thank you. Thank you to our law enforcement officers. And if to blatant crime when it's politically expedient. And that's what we have to stop.
Right on. Well, thank you so much. We are unfortunately out of time. Thank you for spending your Thursday night with us, and enjoy the rest of your evening.